All right, welcome to Aurelia's Virtual Book Club. We are discussing A Fairy Tale Bride, and Kelly came back. Yay! I really liked your book. I finished it all really fast a long time ago. Like at the beginning of the month. I think I read it in a day. Really interesting that the Lord, he felt so strongly that Miranda needed to learn a lesson.
Yeah, he had a little bit of a over-responsibility streak to him.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. But how he went about doing it was interesting. I don't know. It was a little bit like, you know, when you're a kid and your parents want you to do your homework instead of reading your book. So they take your book away and won't give it back.
That's a good analogy. I was driving around doing errands this morning, and I was listening to NPR, and they were kitchen women, kitchen sisters. I never heard that show before, and they were doing stories about people, and they were telling all of these stories about women and you know, how they are in the world. And there were some really interesting stories, and I completely forgot where I was going with this, which is really annoying because I wanted to tell you a particular story, and I'm thinking of a different one now. But there was a really interesting one about an African man, and he called out to tell about when his mother married his father in their village. She was very strong Catholic, so she started to go around to teach women about basically the rhythm method. Mm-hmm. And she didn't speak the language very well. So he, as an 8-year-old boy, went around to interpret for her on these very intimate topics that generally women did not speak about with 8-year-old boys. And that is not the story I wanted to tell, but I do recommend Kitchen Sisters. And if I think of what the other story was, I will mention it, because I'm sure it was extremely relevant.
How do you think that he managed to like be so overprotective without being like on the wrong side of that?
No, I think he was on the wrong side of it a couple times. Well, I think
but like he wasn't, as a person overall, he wasn't on the wrong side of it. In terms of like, he wasn't like abusive and restrictive and confining. He was just overprotective.
Exactly, but I think that you know, we can all relate to that. We've all had our times when we see a friend or a child or a sister or even a parent who's doing something we think is really, really wrong for them, and where, you know, we want to see them, we want to take their book away, I guess. Oh, that was the story. Okay, so the story that I heard about taking a book away was this Scottish woman called up and related a story about when she went to a boarding school that was for women. And she said, and you know, obviously she's relating this story, so it wasn't 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. But the woman who ran it thought women shouldn't be educated. So when they did their lessons, down in the stables. And their books stayed down in the stables. They weren't allowed to bring them up to the house with them.
That's rude.
I know. I thought I could never. If someone took my book away, I would have to live in the stable. And I don't think I would like the way the stable smelled, but I would get used to it. So anyway, it was relevant.
I don't know. If someone took my book away, I think I would go fight them and like forcibly take it back. I'm very possessive about my books.
I have to have my books. I know. I couldn't spend so little time with a book. It would be very difficult. But I just think we all that when that over responsibility comes from a place of, caring about a person, we're more inclined to forgive. You don't necessarily, want to live that way, but we sort of want to understand, okay, this is what they're concerned about. How do we deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think my mom stopped trying to take my books away so I would do my work before high school. Which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because I didn't have high school or school. And like it's like part of their thing.
Oh, so you went to like a progressive school. I would have liked to, but I never did. You're frozen. I don't know if I've lost you.
I don't.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
You were frozen for a second, so I didn't hear you. What did you say?
No?
No, I'm not hearing you.
That's interesting. I'm definitely hearing you.
Okay. I heard you that time, but you're not moving.
You should be able to hear me.
Now
because everything is all the same.
I'm playing around with my phone.
Unless my internet is weird. Is my internet weird? No, it's the Google Hangout is showing my little.
I hear you fine now, and I see you fine now. So it was just a little glitch. Maybe it was mine. So I forgot what we were talking about. I guess I just think we all have our 50 shades of responsibility, and some of the shades are just too dark.
Yeah. Or else when they're used, instead of trying to actually keep someone safe when they're used to justify doing something that's not actually ethically.
Well, that's bad for the other person. Yeah, we always have to wonder about that. I think I tend to be fairly easy on my characters.
Yeah. I'm with the little girl and the cottage. I thought that was awesome because a little girl would totally do that. Would totally not understand the issue of talking about it, and then would say something and cause problems. Yeah.
I don't know where those things come from. I always like those things the best where, you set up a scene and you're like, something needs to happen, and then, oh, look, this is what's going to happen. And then that particular character you introduced just takes on a life of their own and takes the story somewhere you weren't really thinking it was going to go. So, yeah.
Yeah.
That happens to me to this day, which I like.
Yeah, me too. It makes getting unstuck easier sometimes.
You just open yourself up to the universe. What interesting thing can I add today?
Yeah. But I liked the little girl a lot.
I liked her too. My only concern was whether she stole the scene, which I think she really did.
She did kind of steal the scene at the beginning, but that was helpful for the story. Because if she hadn't stolen the scene for that scene, then he wouldn't have decided that they had to get married.
That's true. She was an important catalyst.
Yeah.
And I did have fun thinking about how to play with all the different little elements. You know, thinking about basically I was kind of using the Cinderella theme for that story. But I just couldn't quite make her life as drab as Cinderella's.
Yeah.
Or as lonely.
And she didn't meet him through a ball.
No.
Like back before when they originally met, not when the reader first meets her in the story.
Right. Right.
So in that sense, he was actually her.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It was just a really long
time
between midnight and the shoe incident.
Yeah.
But I don't think those stories have to be literally retold. Although it can be fun to do that.
Yeah. It's more about like I don't know. The fairy tales leave unanswered. The original ones, I mean. It's interesting to explore those. Like what happens after what does happily ever after even mean? Because like that's different for everyone.
It really is. And there in some ways there really isn't a happily ever after in that static sense.
Yeah.
Because it's just not reality. Our lives keep moving and changing, and good things and bad things.
Yeah.
But it is fun because the reason I wrote that book was because I needed to have a book that had a clear ending. And, you know, when you write a romance, it has a clear ending.
So the other books in the series are all about the sisters, or is there one about her brother and his star-crossed love life also?
Her brother also has a story, so they all have stories.
Okay.
Because, you know, once I
have
write
to
a
go
character,
look it up, because the brothers one I thought was very well teased in this particular one.
Well, talk about a story taking a strange turn. That story took a really strange turn because I have him sort of have like a serial killer in that book. And
a romance with a serial killer, or a romance with a serial killer trying to break them up?
Well, you know, parents look at titles, so they don't actually look at whether the person they're marrying off their child to is good or not. So they kind of overlooked the serial killer thing for the title. And so, you know, it's another overprotective street story, if you will. The poor character, poor Valentine, has to actually masquerade as a servant in the household to protect his true love. Which really was interesting thinking about. You know, I really wondered. It's one of the things I always wonder about in Victorian times, and in any of those times where the class was really important. I wonder how difficult it is to pull off the switch one way or the other. Because there's so many little rules, so many life lessons, so many ways you have to behave when you're in one class, that I wonder how easily. I'm sure there are some people. I mean, I always think of the guy who was able to, like, I forget what his name was, but he was able to pretend to be a pilot and a doctor and a million different things successfully, and they didn't find out about him for a really long time.
I think it depends on your ability to talk and walk like whoever it is you're trying to impersonate. Because in England and London and in England and all of the, like, in most of Europe, in fact, I think, depending on what class you were born into, you were raised to have a certain accent. And if you were well educated as a servant because you were going to be working in the household, then you would have, some of your accent would have been educated out of you, but not all of it.
Yeah.
So that would have been hard.
I think some people can do it,
what,
but
just as hard to
not everyone.
put down as it was for Eliza Doolittle to start from the bottom and have to go up.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, but Henry Higgins is out selling flowers, and he would have had a hard time too. I just think
he was, yeah, I mean, but he was also sort of in a place where he shouldn't really have been in order to research different accents.
That's a good point.
So, like, he made a point of studying the accents, so it probably would have been less hard for him to emulate someone else if he had really wanted to, but
he could have he probably could have spoken, but he couldn't have acted. There are other things too.
Yeah.
You know, just the fact that you might look someone in the eye would be a very strange thing for a certain class. And if you're used to looking people in the eye, then trying to change that to where you just, you know, you always have your eyes cast down. You don't speak your opinion unless you're asked. I mean, for me, that would be quite difficult. I don't think I could do it.
Yeah. It's interesting.
But you never know.
If your life depended on it, I'm sure you would be successful.
You'd certainly try harder than you might otherwise. It's what I enjoy when I look at like a fantasy story or a story set in a historical time that's not contemporary, is that you can play around a little bit with those things that you wonder about. What would it have felt like to be sort of stuck this way?
Yeah. I think it was like a PBS series, and now of course I'm forgetting what it's called. We might have talked about it last time, but like they have different versions of it, and basically they recreate like an entire time.
Is it a reality series?
Yeah, it's a reality TV show. And
yeah,
one of them was like, yeah, there was a Victorian one in like a little house.
Oh, then there were the pioneer ones. Yeah.
Then there were the pioneer ones, and then there was I think it must have been like a turn of the century one. It was very similar to Downton Abbey, and they might have used the same house to film Downton Abbey. I don't remember.
Okay.
But they had some people were playing the family, and some people were playing the servants. And
they were supposed to stay that way, right?
Yeah, like for like a month or something. And it was really interesting because there was this, like, you could tell that the girl who was playing the scullery maid and the guy who was playing the, like, footman, like, as part of this reality TV show, they, like, met and fell in love with each other. But, like, they couldn't actually talk about it. They couldn't, like, hang out. They couldn't socialize because they were the scullery maid and the footman.
Right, because that would be improper. Yes.
Yeah, and if like, and according to the rules of the time, if two servants were found to have a relationship with each other, they were let go. So it was really interesting from a like, what things do you not think about when you're reading stories that would have happened?
Well, one of the things, because I have a friend who's a huge stickler for accuracy, and so she'll say like, okay, so that was the rule, so it would never happen. And I said, you know, there are lots of rules that we have that, you know, people don't pay attention. And, you know, there are plenty of things we know about in real history where people broke the rules and didn't have the same consequences that we would have expected, or as dire. They definitely had consequences. And so I'm guessing that it totally depended. Like if you had like this matchmaker mistress, you know, who was always trying to get the servants, you know, married off, you know, then in that household, it might work out. You never know. But on the other hand, if you have like somebody who's like really stiff and stickler for the rules, then you'd really be afraid to show any true emotion or let them know anything that was going on. So it's still all personality, just like it is today.
Yeah. That reminds me of the other book that we talked about in the other episode, but the Tracy Ann Warren one.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, the main character Violet fires the housekeeper, and the housekeeper was like, everyone was terrified of her, and that's why she had never been fired, is because they were all scared of her. But the woman that they get as the new housekeeper, like, she totally included this just so that readers wouldn't be, but what happened about the housekeeper? So it was very briefly mentioned, but the new housekeeper came from a household where she couldn't, be nice. And she was required to be mean, and she was like, I don't want to work there because it's easier to manage people when you're allowed to be nice.
Exactly.
So,
and I do think that's a natural tendency that people have. Society can only suppress it to a certain level. It's going to come out one way or other.
Yeah.
And it's nice to play with that because, if you're in a safe place, in the story, you can suddenly make it into an unsafe place for some reason, introduce a new element, or you can turn it into a safer place like she did with a nicer housekeeper.
Yeah. 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 I don't know. I like reading stories that sort of show you why doing certain things is maybe not a good idea, or why doing something different might be a better idea, and stuff like that. It gives you more scope of imagination to like figure out what you're doing yourself.
And I think what I like about in stories, because those lessons are never really the kind you can throw into a Julia Child. I mean, not Julia Child. Who's the etiquette person? Emily Post. To an Emily Post, because, all situations are different. You always have to kind of deal with the people and the personalities and the situations that you're dealing with. So there's some broad guidelines, like try not to be rude, and knowing what's rude is even an interesting problem. Some people think so many things are rude that I'm like, I don't get it. I was just watching something about it was totally appropriate, this show. I forget what it was. They were talking about what people say after at a funeral, something like that. It'll get better, or he's with the angels, or whatever. And some people can get very offended by that, and yet the people who are offering it aren't offering it to be rude. They're just trying to bridge that suffering gap. So it's kind of interesting. I think I've lost you. You're not coming back. Did I lose you?